Meantime, there are questions surrounding the president-elect's new pick for FBI director. Over the weekend, Trump announced he's tapping Kash Patel as head of the agency. Patel served in intelligence and defense roles in President-elect Trump's first term in office. The outspoken Trump loyalist has vowed to make substantial changes to the agency's leadership and mission if confirmed.
The two-tier system of justice is the deep state's wrecking ball and operational arm of choice, and we need to destroy it. And the only man that has stood up and exposed it and will bring accountability to the American people is President Donald J. Trump.
Now, Christopher Wray is currently still serving as FBI director. He was appointed in 2017 by then-President Donald Trump. The role carries a 10-year term, which means he's slated to remain in his position until 2027. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is following the president-elect and his transition team from West Palm Beach, Florida. Nancy, what do we know about Trump's FBI director pick, and what are his chances of being confirmed?
Hey, Lindsay, great to see you. So he is 44 years old. Kash Patel served in a number of key roles in the first Trump administration. He was at the National Security Council. He was serving with the Director of National Intelligence at the very end of the administration. He served in the Pentagon as the Chief of Staff to the acting Secretary of Defense. So he's got a lot of experience in government. He also worked on Capitol Hill. But he has a lot of controversy that has followed him from job to job. He is a big-time Trump loyalist. He was outspoken about some of the president's claims that the election was stolen, for example. This is something that Patel echoed loudly, even though he was working at the Department of Defense at the time, where you're typically supposed to stay away from partisan politics. He has also made it very clear that if he ever were to get this job, that he would shut the FBI down on day one. He would purge it of anyone who he feels is not sufficiently loyal to Donald Trump and then reopen it. He has also suggested that he would go after Trump's enemies, including politicians and the media. And so that's why the announcement raised eyebrows when the president-elect made it this weekend. But also, as you pointed out, the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, is still serving out his 10-year term. He's supposed to be in place for 3 more years. And the reason that FBI directors have 10-year terms is so that presidents aren't free to name whoever they want, so that there is no appearance of impropriety or favoritism. And so the fact that Trump is now suggesting that Wray either step down or potentially get fired in order to make way for Kash Patel is unusual in and of itself.
All right, let's talk about some of his other picks. Trump tapped his daughter Tiffany's father-in-law, Lebanese businessman Massad Boulos, as his pick to serve as senior advisor to the president on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. What can you tell us about his credentials and what he'll be tasked with?
He is a Lebanese-American businessman. He runs the family automotive business. He made a lot of his money in West Africa. He doesn't have any government experience per se, but he does have relationships in the Middle East. And he was a key ally during the campaign, going to Michigan in particular to talk to Arab American communities there and urge them to get behind Donald Trump. He is one of 2 fathers-in-law of Trump children who were named to prestigious posts over the weekend, the other being Charles Kushner, who is the father-in-law of Ivanka Trump, who President-elect Trump pardoned several years ago during his first term, and who will now be sent to France as the ambassador if he is confirmed.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. Joining us now from Washington is Joshua Skule. He is the former FBI Executive Assistant Director for Intelligence and currently the CEO of the security service Bow Wave LLC. First of all, thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and talk about Kash Patel. He was proven loyal to President-elect Trump. What do you make of him for the role? What are his qualifications?
So on paper, he has served in a lot of senior leadership positions within the government, but mostly as chiefs of staff. He does not have the depth of experience to lead a 37,000 person organization that is global in nature. Also, some of his statements that he has made are a little alarming, and they will have to survive confirmation in order for him to ascend to the role as the FBI director.
Nancy was talking about why FBI directors have those 10-year terms. Why might the president-elect be looking to part ways with Christopher Wray heading into his second term?
So my guess is that the president-elect wants to part ways with the current FBI director based on the investigations that have gone on under his watch. He did not receive the outcomes he wanted, or the FBI would not do what he had wanted under Director Wray, who has acted as a very impartial, independent, as he should be, director of the FBI.
As someone who's been inside the agency, what are the most important traits for a successful FBI director?
Well, every FBI director is going to come in and take an evaluation of where the organization stands and where it needs to go. I think as a new director comes in, that is something he or she will have to do. In this case, Kash Patel. If they come in with a predetermined notion on what needs to happen, I think they could potentially do real damage, not only to the organization, but really put our national security at risk.
And this is also the third person Trump is looking to name to the position. Only 2 directors have been fired in agency history. How uncommon is it for a president to make this number of selections? And to Nancy's point, that the reason there are these 10-year terms, they're typically not fired, is to sort of remove any hint or idea that there could be anything improper going on, any type of favoritism. Does sort of all of that go out the window when it comes to Trump?
I don't know if it all goes out the window. I mean, originally the term was designed to span presidential administrations to avoid political controversy or to really be a political pick. And that's why it's 10 years, because, president's term times 2 is 8 years. And so that's how it's gone. What we've seen from the president-elect is he does not follow those norms. And we saw, obviously, Jim Comey get fired, and one other director 30 years or 20 years earlier also get fired. But it is common for presidential appointees and Senate-confirmed positions to submit their resignation. So I'm not sure what Director Wray will do, but that is not an uncommon practice for a presidential nominee.
Okay, interesting. Josh Skule, thanks so much.
Thank you.